Great, hello. Welcome everybody. We're just tuning in. Just waiting give people a few seconds to log in. How are you doing, Paul?
I'm very well. It's like a very crisp winter's morning, getting chilly here in the UK, but no, good. Are you well?
Yeah, very well. Very well indeed. Let's see how we're getting on for attendees. Yeah, looking good. So we're at time, so I think I'll kick off. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Really excited to be here to share with you our latest Think Forward report. It's our annual deep dive into what's happening in social media trends around the world. And this year our theme is Fragmented Futures. So we're going to take you through what that means and take you through the trends in a minute. So just to introduce ourselves, who's with you today? Myself, Mobby Nazir. I'm the Global Chief Strategy Officer at We Are Social, and I'm joined by Paul. Paul, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Greenwood. I head up the Research and Insights team here in the UK. Great.
So we're going to take you through the report today. Just a bit of a background about us before we get started and the work we've been doing in this space. So this is actually the 8th year of our Think Forward report. So we've been doing this analysis now for a while. It's been quite exciting to see how the landscape has evolved in all of that time. For us, this report is really important because we very much believe that culture moves at the speed of social. And so this deep dive into social and cultural trends and what we're seeing around the world is used by us internally, but also used by our clients, and a really handy reference for things to be prioritizing for the year ahead. So that's kind of a bit of background into the report. In terms of us as an agency, we are a global agency. We describe ourselves as a socially led creative agency. We're in 16 markets around the world. We have 1,300 plus social media experts all over the world. And this is a great source of information and insight for us in terms of the work that we're doing globally, looking at how trends are bubbling up around in different regions, in different markets, being able to see what's happening in local markets and then taking a global perspective and thinking about what the bigger patterns and trends and themes that we're seeing, which feeds into this report every year. In addition to the annual report that we do that we're going to take you through, we also have a daily cultural tracker. So if you don't already follow this, I highly recommend that you do. It's on Instagram. You just need to search for the feed.global. It's a daily dose of what we're seeing happening in social media around the world. And it's a highly useful sort of resource, again, that we use internally, and again, that feeds into this report. So if you want to know what's happening on a daily or weekly basis, a great place to sort of tune in and find out. So do give that one a follow if you haven't already. So we're going to jump into the trends. There are 5 of them this year: textured discovery, collapsing narratives, margin chasers, new cooperatives, and expanding identities. So all really exciting and interesting and thought-provoking in their own right. But before we go deeper into each of these trends, I'm going to talk a little bit about our overall theme for this year, which is fragmented futures, and why are we talking about that? Well, first of all, as we all know, the last 2 years have been, fairly disruptive. It's been a wild ride in terms of getting used to this new reality of living our lives in a hybrid way. We've adapted to these challenges really well, some of us better than others. Poor Rod Ponton here, he wasn't able to get rid of his cat filter in his meeting and went viral as a result. And I know we've all had those moments. But we've learned and we've worked through these challenges. And as a result, we've really seen the benefits of living in our lives in these hybrid ways. We've seen the benefits both sort of individually, and as a society. We've seen the benefits at work, at play, in our social lives. And now we really don't want to sort of roll back those benefits that we're seeing because we've got used to it and we're sort of more familiar with living our lives in these ways. So that's one level of disruption that we've embraced. The other level of disruption that we're embracing is the speed at which social is moving. Social media has always moved very, very fast. But I was looking at some data recently that I found really interesting about the life cycle of a trend. So a Twitter trend used to last for about 11 hours back in 2016. Now, in the last couple of years, that timeline has gone down to 11 minutes. So that is how fast hype cycles are bubbling up, becoming famous and then dropping away again. 11 minutes is an incredibly short amount of time. So the amount of content that we're now exposed to has just completely exploded. And as a result, it's getting harder and harder to stand out in the feed. And creators are finding ways to hack the algorithm and break our feeds so that they can be more sort of prominent and gain more visibility. So a great example of this is Mr. Beast. He is one of the world's most famous YouTubers, and this is a piece of content that he's done with Gordon Ramsay, and it's been analyzed. It's a 45-second piece of content, but it actually contains 176 attention-shifting moments in it, different cuts, different moments to grab your attention, bursts of activity. So that's a huge amount of activity that's going on, and it's creating a feed that is more fast-moving and more chaotic than ever before, and harder to stand out. The other disruptions that we're seeing are coming from the platforms themselves. So we've seen the rise of TikTok over the last couple of years, very disruptive platform because of the way that TikTok's algorithm is based on an interest feed rather than your social feed. So all of a sudden you're getting content, not just from people that you know, on friends and family, but it could be from anybody based on your interests. And those interests are becoming more and more niche over time as these algorithms are getting more and more sophisticated and learning even faster what we really like. We're also seeing some of the other platforms trying to shift around these changes as well. So Instagram trying to shift from the interest graph as well, also leaning into more video-based content, and then Meta going all in on virtual worlds and virtual realities with their focus on VR and AR. So platforms also trying to lean into these disruptions to both anticipate but also drive new consumption patterns with consumers. Then on top of that, the cultural landscape, as ever, is expanding. So we've known for a while that the English-speaking West used to dominate global culture, but that's changing. And in the last couple of years, we've seen that change even faster. So things like Squid Games becoming the most popular show on Netflix, which has actually come from Korea, or Bad Bunny being the most streamed artist on Spotify, who is actually Puerto Rican, and Kabi Lami being the most followed person on TikTok, who is actually Senegalese Italian. Suddenly culture has become so much more diverse and rich than ever before. And so we're exposed to content from in so many more different places. So all of this is leading to what we're describing as a fragmentation of the landscape. We've gone through this period of disruption, but actually what has happened as a result is that we're actually more confident in dealing with fragmentation and choice. It isn't something that frightens us as much. We can embrace it, and we also see the benefits of it. So some of the benefits that we're seeing are, first of all, we're now exploring more sort of niche spaces and new worlds. And we've seen that with the rise of things like the NIM cell, which are niche internet micro celebrities. So these are not your average sort of TikTok or YouTuber that are chasing Hollywood fame, but they're people who have more niche followings, but cult followings. So smaller groups of people intensely interested in what they have to say or do. They could be meme account admins, they could be hyper-local Twitter celebrities, they could be the founder of popular Discord servers, but they represent a very important and growing shift in the attention economy. We're also getting more confident in experimenting with our identity. So this has been really exciting to see over the last couple of years. People like Harry Styles, Timothée Chalamet, ushering in a new era of masculinity, opening up the sort of opening up masculinity to being more emotionally vulnerable, to gender fluid fashion. So Harry Styles being the first male to feature solo on a US Vogue cover. He posed in a Gucci dress, openly challenging gendered fashion norms. And a few months ago, Timothée Chalamet strutted his stuff on this absolutely stunning backless red satin halter-neck jumpsuit at the Venice Film Festival. So great examples of how we've become far more confident to experiment with our identity. We're also more confident to collaborate and create our own stories. So in the last few weeks, we've seen this little-known Scorsese movie, Goncharov, trending on social media. It's a movie that has film trailers, it's got posters, it's got a soundtrack, it's got reviews, it's even got a video game based on the movie. But if you're wondering why you've never heard of it, it's because this movie actually never existed. It's been entirely created on Tumblr by users in painstaking detail. And it's a great example of how people are coming together in communities to create new things, and that their creations are often taking on a life of their own, to the extent that even Scorsese himself has jokingly now confirmed that he's made this movie that actually has never existed. And finally, we're becoming more confident to live a life of serendipity. We're looking to move out of our filter bubbles, and we're becoming more open to content from new sources and new places, exploring things that we wouldn't normally see in ways that we wouldn't normally experience. I love this quote from Matt Klein, who is Foresight strategy lead at Reddit, and he says, 62% of people want streaming platforms to recommend more unpopular content, even at the risk that they may not like it. So this is just a great example of how we're looking for content that isn't the sort of stuff we normally come across, and we're open to serendipity. And the example we have here is from Netflix, which is a show that they've just launched called Kaleidoscope, which I think really leans into this new confidence. And it's a show that is a crime drama in 8 parts, but you can choose to watch this drama in any order you wish. So each episode is color-coded, and you can start that crime drama at any point. And depending on where you jump into the drama, you get different viewpoints on the characters and the storyline, but it will all hang together no matter what order you watch it in. So a great example of leaning into this confidence of dealing with a life of serendipity. So what does this mean for brands? Well, fragmentation, of course, creates fewer predictable patterns, but at the same time, it creates a lot more creative opportunities, which we think is really exciting. And that's what these trends are really leaning into. So a couple of examples of how brands are leaning into these creative opportunities. First of all, we have Spotify, who are bringing people together in new worlds to create content around their niche. So they've launched within Roblox an activation called Spotify Island. And this is going to be a collection of islands themed by different music cultures and genres. So far they've planned a K-pop island and hip-hop themed island. But the vision for this experience is to be a place that people don't just listen to music, but they can also create and perform their own. We're also seeing brands leaning into this opportunity to reflect the changing consumer values and attitudes around gender and self-expression. So an example of this is Virgin, who removed the requirement for gendered uniforms in September this year, and also introduced pronoun badges. So this is on their part, an ongoing drive to champion individuality of staff and of their customers. And whilst unfortunately they had to suspend this policy for flights to Qatar during the World Cup, overall, this has been a hugely successful initiative, with applications for jobs to be cabin crew doubling since they made this announcement. And then finally, we're seeing brands leaning into this opportunity to collaborate with fans and to build their brand for the future. So Lego is a brand that's doing this really well. They've evolved to deal with the fragmentation that they're seeing around them. You know, they're competing not only with other toy makers, but video games and social media for attention. And their audience is already creating stories featuring their toys on platforms like Wattpad. So they developed a platform to harness this energy and talent, and it's called World Builder. It opens up a direct line between fans to the brand to propose ideas for new Lego storylines or toy ideas. And they've said that they will buy the ideas that they like. So they've budgeted $500,000 a year to pay for platform users when they like their submissions. And so it's a great example of like leaning into collaboration with fans. So as I said, this fragmented landscape, you know, it creates this loss of predictability in terms of what's happening. The trends are moving very fast, disruptions coming very quickly, but it's also a massive birth of opportunity for all of us. And that's what leads us into our 5 trends, which we're going to take you through one by one now. Before we move on to that, just to say we're going to be able to take questions at the end as well. So if you do have any questions as we're going through all of this, please don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A box and we'll come to them at the end. So for now, I'm going to hand you over to the first trend, which is textured discovery.
Thanks, Mobby. So this is a super interesting trend that tracks a shift in behavior in our internet users, and specifically Gen Z. search for content and products on the internet. So no longer does it start and end in a Google search bar when you come to search for things. What people are looking for is a more exploratory journey, one that is highly curated, and one that is through lived experiences. And there's two things that are driving this. The first thing is algorithmic anxiety. So people are fully aware of the pitfalls of just following the algorithm and not being able to burst out of your filter bubble. So people want to do that. And the second thing that people are interested in is they're more open to having a more crowdsourced guidance when it comes to suggestions of what they should do. And I don't mean simply by going to an influencer or a professional critic. What they're looking for and what they're seeking guidance from is a hive mind, so the collective. And social is really driving this. So social is really enabling a more exploratory search journeys, and we see it through fascinating Reddit subthreads. We see it in the far-flung corners of Roblox, and we see it in the sensory minefield of TikTok. And a really interesting example of this is a Reddit subthread here called Books That Feel Like This. So instead of looking for a new book via your favorite artist or your favorite author, or your favorite genre, or even a bestseller list, what people are doing are going to this cult thread and posting an image. It could be an image of a wintry countryside day. It could be a sweltering hot day in Medina, or it could be an intense embrace in some choppy waters by what look like two soldiers. The thing that really hangs this all together is that the images themselves invoke a certain emotion and a certain feeling. And people are beginning search journeys with feelings, and that feeling flows throughout the whole search journey. And that is really fascinating because it kind of cuts out the functionality of a lot of search. And we know this is really important because Google are also concerned about it. So they've carried out some research, and one of their senior vice presidents here says young people, when they're looking for a place for lunch, they don't go to Google Maps or search, they go to TikTok and Instagram. And this has got them slightly concerned because by their reckoning, about 40% of Gen Z now start their search journey on TikTok and Instagram. And that obviously has massive implications for Google search. So if Google is sitting up and taking attention, I think everyone else should do. So how this is manifesting itself on social. So there's a few behavior changes that we think are really, really interesting. So the first is thinking about first-hand stories. So users are landing on information shaped by lived experience far earlier in the search journey. So people would generally find a product, some content that they want to buy, and they would go to a review site. But what we're seeing right now is that comes to the right at the beginning of the consumer journey. So there's TikTok tours of East London, what to watch on Netflix. These are the starting points for a consumer journey nowadays. And that kind of upends everything and makes it quite interesting and a very interesting implication for brands and how they target individuals. As I've just described with Books That Feel Like This, a lot of the time it starts with a feeling. And it's not just a feeling, but it could be a niche mood, it could be aesthetics. And that opens up a different route into the consumer journey as well. So again, a really interesting way of how you might target individuals. And we also know that people are hacking the algorithm. People know what the algorithm stands for. They want to break out of it. And a really interesting example from the real world is the TK Maxx blind outfit challenge. So this is where someone goes into TK Maxx, rocks up to a rack, closes their eyes, walks down it and picks out an item of clothing that they'll wear. They post it on TikTok. And it's obviously, I think it really invokes this kind of serendipitous kind of search journey that people are looking for when it comes to content and products. So how can brands be tapping into this? So there's three things that we think you should look to do. And first, you should always look to surprise your audience. We know that it's difficult to get people's attention on social and in life generally. So you need to offer them something new in exchange for that attention. You need to lead with these real stories and put first-hand consumer stories in your messaging, and people will really resonate with that. And you need to make discovery a shared act to make it feel collaborative. People are willing to be part of that kind of the part of a collective journey together. And a brand that has really been tapping into this over the last couple of years is Cortez. So they're a UK streetwear brand, and they've been carrying out guerrilla marketing for the last number of years, but this activation is a really interesting and fun one that they did this year. And basically it's quite complicated, but they created a massive scavenger hunt on both online and offline. And people would have to solve clues and go to certain areas in London that evoke the Cortez spirit. Go into offer licenses like this, find a specific product, go to the cashier and pay with 99 pence exactly. And once they did that, they were then given a very expensive coat in return. It worked really, really well in terms of like, it helped the consumer, really feel what the brand felt in terms of when it comes to the different areas that it wanted to be associated with, and really made them work for it and made it a really enjoyable experience. So, so this is the first trend. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat and we'll answer them at the end. The next trend is one of my favorites. So this is collapsing narratives. And what we're seeing right now is that storytelling is no longer linear or following established structures. And what we mean by that is basically there is no beginning, middle, and an end of a story. And this is being driven by two kind of key things. The first is the power of fandoms. So fandoms have very long memories, and so they don't need a backstory when it comes to new content about a brand, about a film star, about an artist, about a sports brand. They know what's happening and they remember. The second thing that's happening, and Mobby's already kind of mentioned this, is the shift to the interest graph. So as you shift to the interest graph, you need to capture people's attention with your content immediately. And so often it starts with attention. And to lure you into that kind of content, basically you're missing the beginning of a story. And these two things are at play and really changing the kind of structure of stories as we go forward. A really good example of this is something that happened earlier this year at the Venice Film Festival. And so it's quite a long story. I'll try and take you through it. But basically what happened was Harry Styles on the right allegedly spat on his co-star Chris Pine at the premiere. If you were on social that evening, across all social platforms, this was just blowing up for hours on end. But the story didn't start on that day. It started years earlier, and the filming of the film called Don't Worry, Darling. Harry Styles wasn't the original lead actor, and that was Shia LaBeouf, who got dropped because of some problematic behavior with his girlfriend. Olivia Wilde, the director, and the lead actress Florence Pugh came together and said, we're not willing to put up with that kind of behavior, so we're having him out of the film, and Harry Styles was brought on instead. Now, two kind of things happened during the filming of the premiere, during the film, sorry. The first was some texts were released that showed that Olivia Wilde tried to keep Shia LaBeouf on the film, and that caused a rift between her and Florence Pugh. And then Olivia Wilde started a relationship with Harry Styles, whilst allegedly still married to Ted Lasso actor. There was a lot of big social media moments within the story where Olivia Wilde's husband said he found out she was cheating because she created a salad with a certain special salad dressing, and that was a moment on social in itself. He apparently laid down in front of her car so she couldn't drive to set. Their relationship ended when he served divorce papers to her during a press junket, which was a massive moment in the media. And all this kind of accumulated with the premiere, where Florence Pugh was unwilling to walk down the red carpet. She walked down by herself. There were some really super awkward photos. And then Spitgate, where Harry allegedly spat on Chris Pine. He didn't. Everyone slowed it down, looked at it. It was all fine. But that was a huge backstory there. And a cultural commentator, Ryan Broderick, said recently, every cultural political event now requires at least 3 paragraphs of backstory to have even the surface level of understanding of what's going on. I feel like that's super important for social, because social media content right now will just jump in and ignore the backstory, but people need that and need to go and look for that. So again, how is this manifesting itself on social? So the first thing that we're seeing is that there's cross-platform stories. So conversations don't need to play out on one platform from start to end. They can be scattered across the internet. The other thing that can happen is that you can have multiple narrators of the same story, which for a client and the implications for them, I think is really interesting in terms of how you might work with an ambassador or your staff or an influencer. You could have them all telling the same story in different places and with different voices. The next big behavior that we're seeing is mid-narrative stories. So today's popular culture is basically a continuation of pre-existing stories. And the example that we have on the slide here is Dime Square. So Dime Square is an unassuming square in Lower Manhattan that has basically garnered like cult status. No one knows why it's that famous. It has a few galleries, it has some really cool shops, but it's nothing special. But what's happening is that we're seeing meme accounts set up that actually document the day-to-day life of Dime Square with no backstory, no narrative, looking at the different characters, looking at the different people who come in, like meme accounts like Nalita Dirtbag. But it's created this cult status where people are now going to it as a holiday kind of destination trip. And the final thing that we're seeing is the rise of the explainer, which I just tried to attempt to do with the Don't Worry Darling premiere. But viral culture now requires background explainers to pretty much understand its meaning. And people are making a bit of money out of this. So we're seeing influencers come out whose job is basically to provide a cultural commentary on today's events. They're racking up tens, if not hundreds of thousands of views. And it's a really interesting way of, of basically generating interest in a story. So what can brands do with this? So there's two things that we think brands should be able to do. So one, I think, be brave and open up that creative process and tell that story across multiple media. You don't need to limit it to just one platform. And also work with your consumers as co-creators and create a puzzle for them they're willing to engage with that. And a really lovely example of this is Pringles NPC, which was an activation. And just for those of you who are not aware, an NPC is a non-playable character in a video game. So Pringles offered fans and consumers £20,000 to be an NPC in a Sims game. Their job was basically to fill up a vending machine each day. They obviously, it was quite a big prize, and the £20,000 itself would have been enough to drive fame and media coverage across the internet. But what was really, really interesting and what made this activation really impactful was actually the backstories that people gave for the NPC when they were applying for the job were so elaborate and so detailed that it really extended the campaign beyond this one stunt. It was really interesting. People were very innovative, like playful, and it really worked with the consumer and worked super, super well. So again, if you've got any questions around collapsing narratives, please let us know.
Great, thanks, Paul. Moving on to our third trend, which is margin chasers. And this one is maybe the most challenging one for brands because it's all about the shift that we've been seeing in our feeds lately towards more extreme, chaotic or niche types of content. And I think it's interesting because this kind of content is gaining traction, not just because it's different and disruptive, but also because it's being seen as more real and authentic by people. So one great example of how this kind of absurd, chaotic, niche behavior is capturing our attentions is celebrity culture and the rise that we saw this year of Julia Fox. She's been great at sort of reframing what authenticity means in celebrity culture. She catapulted to fame with her short-lived relationship with Ye, but she's held on to that fame really well through her unpredictable, sometimes absurd, sometimes quite extreme behaviors. And she represents the shift in what we're seeing as aspirational and what we're seeing as authentic, the antithesis of the curated, polished perfection of the Kardashians, for example. So how does that translate into social? Well, every day, there's this quote, every day virtually, there's a new kind of microculture, micro niche aesthetic or vibe. So, in terms of margin chasing behavior, there's just so many places to go, so many different things popping up into our feeds, all the time. And really sort of a massive opportunity, but also sometimes quite challenging for brands to know where to start. So some of the behavioral changes that we're seeing in this space. Well, first of all, we're seeing creators zooming into these niches in different ways. So, it could be from bottled water to ASMR, butter churning to potatoes. You name the niche, there's a creator going viral in it. The example we have here on the slide is Martin Rees, who's a quirky German TikToker he's going viral for his reviews of bottled water. He's telling sort of the truth and lies of the bottled water industry, and he calls himself the water sommelier. So really zooming into that one particular niche and gaining traction and an audience as a result. The other change that we're seeing from a behavioral perspective in this space is people starting to exaggerate the mundane and everyday, because let's face it, social is full of the mundane and everyday. We can't always be extreme or niche. And so people are now starting to intensify their everyday activities through a trend that we've seen called suburban sensationalism. So whether you're making the cup of tea or going for your groceries, you're adding this extra level of drama and crisis and unpredictability around it. So that's one other behavioral sort of change that we're seeing, that exaggeration of the mundane. And at the same time, we're seeing the demonization of the middle ground. So if you're not at the extremes and you're in the middle, you're going to be described as mid, which is basically a shorthand for mid-tier or mediocre, which has basically become an insult now for anything that isn't inspiring. So the last thing you want to be described as a brand is being mid. That is the sort of third behavioral change that we're seeing in this space. So how can brands adapt to this trend? Well, first of all, as I said, there's lots of niches, lots of opportunities. It can be hard for a brand to know where to start, but the important thing is to start with a story that you actually want to tell. What is the message that you need to get across, and then think about, the margins in which you could play. A great example of this is Gucci and their partnership that they had with North Face this year. And they're partnering with a niche TikTok creator, Francis Bourgeois. So he's a train spotter. He's got viral fame from his niche interest in that hobby. But Gucci and North Face together, they decided that strategically what they wanted to be doing is telling stories of eccentric exploration. So therefore, there was a really good fit between them and Francis Bourgeois in this particular case. So a great example of a brand leaning into what feels quite niche and margin chasing, but actually is helping them tell their brand story. And the second opportunity here is, don't be afraid to challenge category norms. I mean, every category has its norms. And, margin chasing is a great way to sort of disrupt those norms in a meaningful, relevant way. So an example of this is some work that we've actually been doing with Heinz. So they, we've been doing social listening for them, and we sort of tapped into this trend of weird food combinations, which are, have been exploding on social for a while. So we created a series of content for them called Saucy Not Sorry, which is leaning into these weird combinations and putting sort of Heinz sauce with stuff that you wouldn't normally put it with. So it could be mustard on watermelon. So it's a series of visual bits of content that really stood out in the feed and generated conversation around them as well, but tapping into that trend in a relevant way and disrupting some category norms along the way. So really helping Heinz to engage with a younger Gen Z audience through this trend. So that's margin chasers. Then moving on to the fourth trend, which is new cooperatives. So this is an evolution of an existing trend that we've seen for a while, of people coming together in communities to affect change. But what we're now seeing is that communities are working together in new, less ego-driven ways. So we're seeing, as I said before, vibrant Discord servers or subreddits or TikTok hashtags, where hierarchy and status are being dropped in favor of more effective community building. So a great example of this, as I've said before, is just Reddit in general, but this particular example, I think is worth sort of pausing on. So this is a subreddit called rspace, which started off as a blank canvas on Reddit, where users could post a tiny colored pixel every 5 minutes. Now, because you could only post every 5 minutes, it really throttled any individual user's ability to dominate the canvas and, put their own artwork on it as an individual. People had to work together in coordinated communities in order to see their vision come to life. And it was done over 72 hours. And it was fascinating to see how this piece of artwork evolved and morphed with the growing ecosystem of memes, cultural references, and niche community symbols, but all of which could not have come together without people finding their communities and working in a less ego-driven way. And at the same time, we're seeing that these online communities are becoming an ever more important part of our daily lives. This global survey found that a stunning 11 out of 15 countries surveyed said that the most important group that they are part of primarily operates online. So, I find that really fascinating that that the groups that we're part of, that are the most important to our lives, are often online rather than offline. I think there's a number of reasons for this. Firstly, online communities often attract those that are marginalized in the physical world that they inhabit. So they use online communities to build these new platforms of connection. But also, many of these groups have got countercultural norms. They cut across traditional social groupings. They bring people together who have normally been divided by geography around shared traits or interests. So the behavioral changes that we're seeing in these spaces, well, first of all, just a general ride of pseudonymous platforms. So platforms like Reddit or Discord that decenter the individual profile around, and rather actually have anonymous communities are thriving. We've seen Discord user growth up 40% this year, Reddit up 16% this year. And we're seeing subreddits like anti-work or fuck cars swelling with their pseudonymity, allowing opinionated consumers to be fully open about their values and beliefs. The second change we're seeing is that users are leaning into co-authored content. So on platforms like Substack, we're seeing top journalists like Anne Helen Peterson, who was previously the culture writer for the BuzzFeed, develop a booming newsletter about pop culture and American society that's been celebrated for its collective authorship. And then finally, we're seeing communal viral moments. So we'll all be familiar with things like the Gentle Minions trend, or even Binley Mega Chippy, which is all about being part of a crowd rather than being the loudest voice in the conversation. Gentle Minions in particular was a collective, anonymous mass mobilization of youngsters coming together to celebrate this movie. So a great example of leaning into this community viral moment. So the brand takeouts that we have for this trend are, first of all, this is a real opportunity to give emerging talent a platform to succeed. A great example of this is the work that we've been seeing just recently from Samsung, an activation called Stem Drop, where they're working on TikTok they've launched a new song in partnership with Max Martin, who is a Grammy award-winning songwriter. And they've launched this song, but at the same time, they've launched the stems, the individual parts of this track so that people can edit, recreate, interpret, sing, remix, and upload their unique versions of this track. So really giving, new emerging talent a platform to succeed. And then the second opportunity we see in this space is partnering with communities to drive positive change. So a great example of this actually in the football industry is Arsenal Football Club is now working with gay gooners to tackle things like homophobia on the pitch and in the game in general. So working with this community to be able to affect a positive change.
Thanks, Mobby. And again, if you have any questions about those trends, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A. So the final trend is, I'll start again. The final trend is expanding identities. And this is where virtual worlds are allowing people to be more flexible and expansive with their identities. And what we're seeing in social online worlds is that as they move from being more text and video based into more immersive, people are being more experimental and playful with their identities and how they self-express. And it's really important for people right now because we're estimated to basically spend about, I think it's about $54 billion this year alone on virtual goods. So that is, your avatars, your skins, your clothes, your accessories for your avatars. It's big, big business. And I guess one of the interesting things for us is like, how do brands really tap into that? And a lovely example that we have here is Queens of the Metaverse that we did with Meta in September this year. So Meta came to us and they wanted to show the limitless possibilities of AR and VR when it came to creative communities. So what we did is we worked with them to come up with this lovely campaign that worked in the real world, in augmented worlds, and in virtual worlds. We found 3 iconic drag artists and we paired them with up-and-coming designers, and they created some really beautiful outfits for them in the real world. We overlaid the AR technology so we could bring them to life in augmented reality, and then we showed how people could work together in the virtual worlds. It was a really lovely campaign that spoke to the community and worked on every single level in virtual, augmented, and in the real world. And it really helped people understand and contextualize what the metaverse could be for future generations. And I think it's important for that, because when you talk to Gen Z, and there's a stat here from Squarespace, which said 60% of Gen Z think that being yourself online and how you represent yourself online is more important than how you present yourself in real life. Now, to me, as an older millennial, I find this stat mind-blowing. I'm like, I find it very difficult to understand that. But when you take a step back and think about it, this is the generation that has grown up in Fortnite and Roblox. And they're not just gaming platforms. It's a place where you can make friends, where you can connect and you can hang out. And that's why being how you show up online is just as important, if not more important, than in the real world. So how are we seeing some behavior changes? So there's some really interesting ones here. The first is around removal of bias and underrepresentation in the metaverse. And we've called this one diverse by design. And what we mean by that is, in the example here on the right, is it's a really interesting example of how people are trying to do this. So it's the open source Afro hair library. So some academics in LA were unhappy with the depictions of black hair in video games. So what they did is they created an open source library where people can create hyper-realistic Afro hairstyles that will work across platforms, and you can have many different variations of that. So what we're seeing is people are trying to fix problems in the metaverse before they take hold and become endemic. The other thing that we're seeing is that people are inhabiting their idols' identities. And what we're seeing here, especially in Asia, is that through AI art generators, people are able to mimic their virtual influencers and inhabit their beings to bring them much closer to individuals. It's a really interesting trend, and there are some kind of problematic areas to it, but I think it's a really interesting way of how you might bring a fan much closer to an influencer. And the final way that we're seeing it is that we're blurring the producer and consumer boundaries in the metaverse. And we know that Gen Z are the side hustle generation. We know that they're constantly looking to become entrepreneurial. And this is happening in the metaverse as we speak. So there's a really lovely example here with Depop and Sims, where in the Sims world, Depop were able to create a space where they could sell digital goods, clothing, accessories, and whatnot. And people were able to go into those, go to Sims, buy those digital goods, and then create their own looks and their own shops, which they could then sell on and gain credits for. So it's a really interesting way of how you might monetize this from a consumer level. And when we look at brands and how they can take part in this trend, well, there's the really obvious one is like you could be that facilitator of self-expression. So brands can think creatively about how you can help people convey and build their identities in the real world. And the example that we have here is from Bake Up. And I love Bake Up. It's a digital first beauty brand. It makes physical goods, but it also makes goods that can be worn, traded, and sold in the metaverse. So from AR filters to looks and feels that you can have on your avatar. It's really interesting that they're taking a cross-platform approach to their marketing and their sales. The other thing that I think a lot of people kind of forget about is that we should consider other markers of identity. Our physical representation is important, but also we have our own personalities, we have our own psychological identity. And an example of this is Adidas Originals Oswald, which allows you to create avatars, not just based on how you look in the real world, but how you feel and your personality. I think that's an interesting way that brands can play into this. It doesn't have to be purely about the outside. It can also be about the inside. So that's the final trend. I'll hand back over to Mobby, but please feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A.
Great. Yeah, so just a quick wrap up. We took you through our 5 trends today under the broad theme of fragmented futures, texture discovery, collapsing narratives, margin chasers, new cooperatives, and expanding identities. So all of this is really pointing towards how culture is dispersing and new online worlds are opening up, and the audience landscape is becoming more and more fragmented. But whilst this next phase of the internet might feel chaotic and unpredictable, we really believe that it presents a lot of exciting opportunities for brands that can translate it in the right way. And those brands are going to be the ones that can adapt and evolve to embrace the fragmentation that's going to help them remain relevant for the future. So that wraps up our presentation for today. If you want to read the full report, which has many more examples in it, you can get in touch. We will share the details. But yes, if you do have any questions, then please do share them with us now, and we'll take a few moments to answer them. Yep, and up on your screen now, you've got the QR code that allows you to access the website, and you can email us as well. So let's have a look at some of the questions that have come in. The first one is about BeReal. So is BeReal going to be a viable platform for brands? Is anyone using it well currently? So yeah, that's a great question. We talked about authenticity and being real in our margin chasers trend, which I think, you know, that is something that on social people are always looking for, and markers of what is real and what is authentic seem to shift every year. And this year, as we've said in our trends, it's more about chasing the margins. I think in terms of, you know, the app itself, it does tap into that sort of need that people have to be more authentic in terms of what they're sharing in their feeds. We are seeing a massive backlash from curated feeds, polished content, you know, only posting the things that look good in your life rather than posting, you know, the real moments, the real intimate moments. But I suppose in terms of for brands, I think at the moment it's hard to see how BeReal is going to scale. I know that there are a couple of brands that are experimenting on the platform, brands like Chipotle and Elf Cosmetics. I think they're using it for sort of discount codes. So, you know, within 24 hours, the first followers to download the code, get discount on product. But not really seen it used any more than that at this point. And I think they're also struggling with number of followers that they can actually have on the platform, because I think there are follower limits. Paul, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think BeReal is quite a difficult one, because as most of the platforms are moving to the interest graph, this is staying with the social graph. So it's people that you know following those people. And like you said, there are more intimate moments, and they're more I guess just more vulnerable moments that you could have there. So it makes it harder for a brand to insert itself into those moments, because it's more protected and it's more closed. But it feels like it's going in the opposite direction to the interest graph, and so it may be difficult for brands to play a role in that space.
Yeah, cool. Christina's asking if we can share the presentation. Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll be able to share it to all attendees afterwards, so stay tuned for that. Next question: when it comes to partnering with celebrities and well-known figures, should brands be moving away from A-list celebrities and looking to social media stars to stay relevant to Gen Z? That's a great question. We actually had the same question last week when we did our event in our office. So yeah, we've got some good insights around that. I think, I mean, the first thing to say is it's going to be a combination of both. It's not that we're saying move away from mainstream stars. It's just that we are seeing, obviously, now this growth of more, I suppose, niche internet micro celebrity style stars, although they're not actually niche. I mean, somebody like Francis Bourgeois actually had quite a big following before being used by Gucci. It's just that he wasn't well known in the mainstream. And I think it points to a broader sort of observation, which is the mainstream just doesn't really exist anymore. There's no cultural moment that appeals to all demographics in the same way at the same time. You know, there are those water cooler moments just don't really exist anymore. So brands need to be more, I think, flexible and adaptable to work across niches in order to get the same scale and impact that they did previously. And I think Gucci's collaboration with Francis Bourgeois was great, because if you knew him, you would resonate with that brand in a way that you never had before. But even if you didn't know who he was, the ad still looks beautiful. It's aesthetically pleasing. It still says a lot about the North Face Gucci collaboration. So even if you didn't know who he was, it still works. And so, you know, they're using their mainstream platforms and channels and scale to kind of communicate, but at the same time introducing that celebrity alongside their other stars allows them to access a new audience that they wouldn't have been able to before.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you can I think working with celebrities, that will never go away. It's just a different way of working. It's higher recognition, and you can have more, I guess it can be quite limiting, but sometimes it can be more freeing in terms of, if you work with someone like Khloe Kardashian, who I love, she did the Febreze advert a few years ago, which really subverted kind of what you expected of the Kardashians. But the likes of Harry Styles, Billie Eilish, they're going to appeal to Gen Z. And so if you're working with them, you'll still get that appeal. It's not one way or another. It's a combination of both. Yeah.
We have a question from Renee. In light of these trends, do you have any tips for a creator just getting started on TikTok? So we actually had a TikTok creator on the panel with us last week, and he was a rapping science teacher. And the thing that he talked about was, I think, he's a science teacher. He was putting content out there, but I think he needed to really find that niche, that sort of overlap between what he does and the interests of his audience, and bringing them together in a way that felt a bit fresh and a bit different. Bringing together his sort of rapping skills with the fact that, he's a science teacher and all the science knowledge he had suddenly made his content really pop with the audience. So, I mean, that would be, I suppose, one of the suggestions that we might make, coming from these trends as a way to be able to stand out. I think there's been no better time for creators to build momentum in these spaces, because we are now looking at the interest graph, not the social graph. There is so many more opportunities to stand out. And, an individual piece of content can go viral even if you don't have a massive following yourself. So this is a great time to establish yourself.
Yeah, definitely find your niche. And also in your edits, like Mobby was talking about Mr. Beast, you can create attention grabbing content that may not be attention grabbing in its copy, if you see what I mean. And we see this playing out, this trend in particular, which I love. We see it playing out in the World Cup. There's some adverts out there where they're so frenetically cut in terms of just like different edits. It feels like this has crossed over into the mainstream advertising. So think about your edits as well and how you might grab attention very early on, especially if you're on TikTok, because you need to lure people in and get them to stay.
Yeah. And then the final question that we have is, what do these trends mean for millennials and older and the brands that cater to them? Well, I think generally all of these trends, we see all demographics engaging in them in different ways. We did have other examples of older demographics that relate to all of these trends as well. So I don't think any of these trends are necessarily not relevant to older audiences. It's just finding those different creator examples and those different niches that relate to those spaces.
Yeah. I'm a millennial. I engage in some of these trends. So yeah, I guess I think what always happens, especially on social and the internet, is things that start like with younger generations often flow through to older generations. Like my dad is he sends me so many TikToks, and he's 70 years old. So I don't think it's just like Mobby said. I think it's an intergenerational thing, and you're not going to we're not excluding older generations within these trends. I think they will partake if it's relevant to them. Yeah,
great. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for your questions today and for joining us for this session. As I said, you can download the full report, read it at your leisure. If you do have any questions, do get in touch with us. But for now, I'm very happy to share with you, and we hope you enjoyed it. Enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.